Welcome to Founding Chronicles, your window into the hidden and haunting stories of America's past. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a journey into history's forgotten corners. Today, a 1909 photo of a boy waving hides a terrifying secret when restored. Let's dive in. Now let's begin asterisk. The summer of 1909 in small-town America was a slow, golden stretch of heat and dust. The kind of summer where the sun would settle like a weight over the fields, and children's laughter would echo off the white-clapboard houses that lined the main street. In one such town, nestled along a winding river and dotted with cornfields, at Whispered in the Breeze, a family decided to have a photograph taken. It was a simple occasion, the kind that seemed ordinary at the time, yet it would linger in memory for reasons no one could have predicted. The boy in the photograph, young and full of life, stood on the porch of the family home. His wide eyes sparkled as he lifted his small hand in a carefree wave, a kind of gesture that seemed to capture innocence itself. His cheeks were rosy from the summer sun, and the corners of his mouth curled into a smile that was both shy and bright. The photographer, a local man with a careful hand and a keen eye for detail, adjusted the camera, his long coat brushing against the wooden floorboards, the lens fogging slightly in the heat. The moment felt frozen in time, a captured echo of a life that had yet to unfold. But beneath that sunny, serene scene lay a subtle tension. The boy's mother, standing just behind him, clutched her apron with white-knuckled hands. Her eyes darted toward the street and the shadows of the old oak trees, as if expecting someone or something to appear. The father, a man whose face had been weathered by years of toil on the river and fields, smiled politely at the photographer, but held his posture rigidly. In the small towns of 1909, appearances were everything, and the idea of showing worry, even on a warm summer day, was almost unthinkable. Yet there was an unspoken heaviness in the air, a weight that seemed almost invisible, like a layer of dust settled over the heart of the family. The photograph was taken. The boy's wave froze mid-motion. The camera's shutter clicked, a sound, sharp and startling in the thick summer air. And then it was over. The family smiled for the remaining moments, exchanging polite nods, and the photographer packed up his equipment, unaware that the image he had captured would, decades later, reveal something that could not be ignored. For years, the photograph hung quietly in a faded frame on the wall of the family home, a relic of an era defined by its simplicity. It was not until nearly a century later that the photograph would be restored, when a young historian with an eye for detail and a fascination with the lives of ordinary Americans began the painstaking process of cleaning, repairing, and digitally enhancing the old image. As the scratches and stains were removed, and the faded tones sharpened into clarity, a chilling detail emerged, one that had remained hidden for all those years. The boy's hand, frozen in the cheerful wave, seemed to be pointing not toward the camera, but toward something else, something far darker. The historian leaned closer, breath held, heart pounding. The shadow behind the boy's mother, previously just a blur in the faded photograph, now took on a defined form. It was a figure, indistinct yet unmistakably human, standing just beyond the porch, half hidden in the shade. Its features were vague, yet the position of the head, slightly tilted, suggested it had been watching the boy for the entire time the photograph was taken. A chill ran down the historian's spine. How could such a figure have gone unnoticed for so long? How could a moment so ordinary hold something so sinister? The local newspaper archives provided no immediate answers. The family had been well known in the town, hard-working, respected, but quiet. The parents never spoke of tragedies, or of secrets lurking behind the polite smiles they offered neighbors and friends. Yet the photograph now hinted at a story untold, a shadow lurking just beyond the reach of light. As the historian delved deeper, examining letters, census records, and personal diaries preserved in the town's historical society, fragments of a tale began to emerge. It was a tale of jealousy, of fear, and of a presence that haunted not just one family, but perhaps the very town itself. The boy in the photograph had grown into a man whose life was punctuated by sudden misfortune. Illnesses that seemed to come without warning, accidents that defied explanation, and an overwhelming sense of being watched haunted him for years. His siblings, too, had experienced similar patterns, each misfortune seemingly connected to the vague figure that had appeared long ago in a moment meant to capture joy. The photograph, once a symbol of innocence, had become a doorway into understanding the darker undercurrents that flowed quietly beneath the surface of everyday life. In 1909, and yet the photograph was also a mirror of the past. It reflected not only fear but hope, not only darkness but light. The boy's smile remained, faint yet unbroken, a reminder that even in the presence of unseen forces, there was courage and there was life. The historian, captivated by the interplay of shadow and substance, realized that the photograph was more than an image. It was a story, frozen in time, waiting for its voice to be heard. And with each careful restoration, each gentle enhancement, the story grew clearer, pulling those who gazed upon it into a past both familiar and alien, where the warmth of summer masked the whispers of something hidden. The more the historian studied the photograph, the more the details began to demand attention. At first, it was almost imperceptible, the way the figure in the background seemed to lean slightly, not at rest, but in anticipation. Its presence, though faint in the original image, became undeniable as modern restoration revealed the subtle edges of a face, the lines of a long coat, and a hand that seemed to stretch toward the boy, though in reality it remained at its side. The image became an anchor, a tether to a past that refused to stay buried. Letters from the boy's father, preserved in a small chest in the attic of the family home, revealed a man who had lived under a growing shadow of suspicion and unease. He wrote about small, strange events. Objects moved without explanation, animals acting skittishly at night, and the recurring sensation that someone was observing him and his family, even when the house seemed empty. To anyone reading casually, these could be dismissed as the musings of a tired man, the complaints of someone worn down by hard labor and the monotony of rural life. But in the context of the photograph, the words took on a new meaning. They became fragments of a puzzle, clues left intentionally or unintentionally for future eyes to piece together. The boy himself, now a man named Samuel in the records, had once written a short journal entry at the age of 12. It was brief, a mere paragraph, but heavy with emotion. He spoke of waking at night to find a shadow in the corner of his room, watching him sleep. He described the fear that made his limbs rigid, the sensation that if he moved, the shadow might strike or vanish or worse, follow him beyond the safety of his bed. Samuel did not speak of these things to anyone else. He feared ridicule or disbelief. But the photograph, decades later, suggested that his fears had not been unfounded. There had been something there, lurking, patient, and inexplicably connected to the moment captured on the summer porch. The historian, following the thread, traced Samuel's life through census records, school reports, and newspaper clippings. Each fragment painted a portrait of a boy whose life was punctuated by small misfortunes and unexplained illness at age 9, a near-drowning incident in the river at 11, and a fire that consumed the family barn when he was 13. These were not catastrophes that defined the town. They were quietly tragic events, recorded with little more than a passing sentence in the local newspaper. Yet, when juxtaposed with the photograph, patterns emerged. They suggested more than coincidence. They hinted at an unseen hand, a presence that shadowed Samuel and his family from the earliest days of his childhood. The mother, whose eyes had darted nervously during the photograph session, had long been whispered about in town stories. Locals spoke in hushed tones about her protective nature, about the way she would watch the children with intensity that bordered on obsession. Some claimed she saw things others could not, shadows that clung to the edges of her vision, movements in the corner of a room that vanished when approached. Her diary, discovered decades later tucked into a hidden compartment in the wall, confirmed these stories. She wrote of unease, of the silent figure in the yard that appeared when no one else was outside. She described the wave in the photograph, the one Samuel gave almost as if it were a greeting, or perhaps a warning, directed at the shadow itself. It became clear that the family had been living with this presence for years, and the photograph was a rare, unintentional capture of it. Yet the question remained, who or what was it? The historian sought out old town records, searching for mentions of unusual figures or unsolved disappearances, but the town's history was largely ordinary. There were no criminal records, no notable incidents beyond the usual misfortunes of rural life. Yet there were whispers, brief newspaper articles from decades past that hinted at a drifter who had been seen in the area around 1908 and 1909. Men spoke of a gaunt figure with hollow eyes, someone who moved silently through fields and alleyways, watched families from the shadows, and vanished before questions could be asked. Could this be the same figure captured in the photograph? As the historian enhanced the image further, the shadow's expression, or what could be read as expression, grew clearer. There was something not just watchful, but anticipatory, as if it had been waiting for the exact moment the camera shutter clicked. The gesture of the boy's wave, once an innocent greeting, took on a new and sinister dimension. It seemed almost as though Samuel had known the figure was there, acknowledging it with a gesture that was both defiant and fearful. The boy's innocence was no longer simple. It had been tempered by awareness of a presence far older and darker than childhood. Fears. The town itself, long forgotten by most historians, began to feel alive again through these discoveries. Streets that had been quiet and unremarkable took on an aura of suspense. Buildings where nothing notable had occurred now seemed like stages for events unseen. Every photograph, every faded newspaper clipping became a potential doorway into the past, a chance to glimpse the lives of ordinary Americans shaped by forces they could not understand. The historian found it impossible to view the town through the lens of ordinary history alone. The photograph demanded a deeper, more human story. But the story of Samuel and the shadow was not simply a tale of fear. It was also one of resilience. The boy grew into a man who carried the weight of these experiences quietly. Despite misfortune and unease, he married, worked, and had children of his own. The photograph, rediscovered by descendants and local historians, became a family heirloom, a reminder that life persisted even in the presence of the inexplicable. His life, though touched by tragedy, was also filled with moments of ordinary happiness, of laughter, and of hope. And yet, that moment on the porch in 1909 remained frozen, a reminder that some things were beyond understanding, and that history sometimes held shadows that refused to fade. The photograph, once carefully restored, became the centerpiece of a small exhibit at the local historical society, drawing townspeople, researchers, and curious visitors alike. When people gazed at the boy's wave, many felt nothing at first, a simple image of childhood frozen in time. But those who lingered, who studied the lines of the porch, the tilt of the shadows, and the darkened shape in the background, often felt an unshakable chill. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it lingered, the sense that something unseen had watched them all along, just as it had watched Samuel. The historian documented every detail meticulously, cross-referencing the photograph with diaries, letters, and archival materials. One particular discovery stood out: a series of letters from Samuel's sister, Margaret. Written when she was 17, they spoke of the Watcher in a tone that was at once frightened and matter-of-fact. She described evenings when she would sit by the hearth, the fire flickering across the room, and feel eyes upon her. She wrote of the sound of footsteps outside the window, even when the yard was empty, and of the inexplicable cold that would seep into the house despite the warmth of summer. Margaret's letters suggested a family that had quietly endured an invisible presence, learning to coexist with it without fully acknowledging its existence. The historian was struck by how this family had normalized the abnormal, how they had continued to live with laughter, work, and celebration, even under the oppressive weight of unseen eyes. The boy's wave, frozen in the photograph, was no longer simply a gesture of innocence. It was a symbol of defiance, a quiet acknowledgement of forces beyond human comprehension. Every crease in the boy's clothing, every flicker of light across his face seemed to carry meaning, as if the photograph itself were communicating a story too subtle to speak aloud, exploring further. The historian uncovered local rumors that had been passed down in whispers over decades. Residents spoke of a figure that appeared sporadically, never harming anyone directly, but always leaving an aura of unease. Some claimed the figure had once been seen on the very porch captured in the 1909 photograph, standing silently as if studying the family. Others recalled that the boy had an uncanny ability to sense danger, to avoid mishaps that seemed inevitable to others. Was it possible that the shadow in the photograph had been testing him, or observing him, guiding events from behind a veil of mystery? As the historian pieced together these fragments, a clearer picture emerged of the boy's early years. Samuel's life was marked by small but persistent incidents that defied explanation. A horse that had been spooked and thrown him during a routine ride somehow avoided injury. A fire that had destroyed the barn stopped just short of the house, leaving the family unharmed despite the flames licking close. Illnesses struck the household sporadically, but Samuel and his siblings often recovered miraculously. The photograph, the letters, and the diaries all pointed toward a life intertwined with a presence that was neither wholly malevolent nor entirely benevolent, a force that seemed bound to the boy in ways no one could articulate. The historian began to feel the weight of empathy, imagining what it must have been like to grow up with such constant, silent observation. Samuel and Margaret's resilience was evident in the smallest details. The careful way Margaret described the household in her letters, the pride Samuel took in small accomplishments, the quiet courage in the mother's eyes, frozen in the photograph, yet filled with unspoken vigilance. The photograph had captured not just a boy waving at the camera, but a moment of endurance, a testimony to human fortitude in the face of incomprehensible forces, to better understand the family's environment. The historian visited the original house, now preserved as a private residence, but retaining much of its early 20th century structure. The porch, though weathered, was still recognizable from the photograph. Standing there, one could almost feel the layers of memory embedded in the wood, the warmth of summer sun, the faint scent of hay and river water, and the intangible weight of presence that had hovered over Samuel and his siblings. The air seemed heavier here, as if the past were pressing gently against the present, urging those who entered to remember, to see beyond the ordinary surface of life, the townspeople. Upon seeing the photograph and hearing the story, shared their own recollections. Some spoke of distant relatives who remembered Samuel and Margaret as unusually perceptive children, prone to speaking of things others could not see. Others recounted folklore of a shadowy figure that roamed the outskirts of town during the early 1900s, never fully understood, never fully explained. The historian realized that the photograph had unlocked more than one story It had revived a collective memory, a history that had been quietly suppressed by time and silence, and brought it back into the light dot. As the restoration progressed further, the figure's details became more distinct. It was tall, thin, and wore what appeared to be a long coat, with features blurred as though the air itself resisted the focus of the camera. Its head was slightly tilted, an almost human posture, yet the expression remained unreadable. The photograph had captured it perfectly in the fraction of a second that the shutter had opened, a frozen moment of surveillance that no one had known existed. The boy's wave, cheerful to the casual observer, now seemed deliberate a recognition, perhaps even a greeting, to a presence that had been part of his life from the beginning. The historian, captivated by this discovery, could not help but imagine the scene on that summer day. Samuel, feeling the weight of unseen eyes, lifting his hand in a gesture that was both natural and compelled by intuition. The mother, tense and watchful, standing a step behind him, aware of the shadow, but constrained by the need to appear composed. The father, his expression firm yet uneasy, guiding the family through a moment that, though outwardly mundane, carried the silent acknowledgement of forces beyond their control. The photograph, once ordinary, now revealed the hidden tapestry of vigilance, fear, and courage that had defined the family's daily existence. The chilling revelation did not diminish the photograph's beauty. On the contrary, it imbued the image with a haunting poignancy. The boy's wave was no longer just a wave. It was a statement of life, persisting in the presence of the unknowable. The family's quiet resilience, their capacity to endure without despair, shone through the faded black and white tones. It was a testament to the way ordinary lives, lived under extraordinary circumstances, could carry stories that spoke across decades, reminding viewers that history was not only made of events, but of human experience, courage, and the invisible threads that connected generations. By the time the historian reached the final stages of restoration, the photograph had transformed from a simple snapshot into a window into a long-buried chapter of the town's history. Each detail, now sharpened and clarified, seemed to pulse with meaning. The shadow, no longer a vague blur, revealed the faintest suggestion of a face elongated, unreadable, but undeniably present. Its hand, slightly raised, gave the impression of interaction, subtle but deliberate, as though it acknowledged the boy's wave. For the historian, this was the culmination of months of research, the moment when speculation became something closer to truth. The townspeople, now gathered at the Historical Society to view the restored image, experienced a mixture of fascination and unease. Elders whispered that they had heard family stories, half-forgotten warnings about a figure that stalked the outskirts of their town in years past. Younger visitors, unfamiliar with these local legends, felt an inexplicable shiver at the image, sensing the weight of a presence that was both intimate and alien. The photograph had bridged generations, forcing a community to confront the hidden history woven into the fabric of their ordinary streets and homes. Delving deeper into the family archives, the historian uncovered a final set of letters written by Samuel toward the end of his life. In them, he reflected on his childhood and the strange figure that had seemed to accompany him, sometimes distant, sometimes close, always silent. He wrote that the figure had never caused direct harm, yet its presence had shaped his life profoundly. It had made him cautious, perceptive, and, in ways he did not fully understand, resilient. The letters hinted that Samuel believed the figure to be neither purely malevolent nor benevolent, but something in between, an observer, a guide, perhaps even a test of human endurance and character. Samuel's reflections brought the historian to a profound realization. The photograph was not merely an artifact of fear, but a portrait of resilience. The boy's wave, cheerful and seemingly innocent, had been an act of defiance, a way to acknowledge the presence without succumbing to terror. The mother's posture, the father's steady stance, and the siblings' quiet composure all spoke to a family that had learned to live with uncertainty, to carry on despite forces they could not name or understand. Their story was emblematic of countless ordinary Americans in the early 20th century who endured hardships visible and invisible, shaping a culture defined by quiet strength and perseverance. The historian compiled all findings into a narrative that intertwined visual analysis, archival research, and oral histories. Each element reinforced the idea that history was not solely a record of major events, but also of human experience, of subtle interactions with forces beyond comprehension. The photograph, once a simple memento, now embodied the convergence of innocence and awareness, ordinary life and extraordinary circumstance. It became a symbol, a reminder that even the simplest gestures, a wave, a glance, a moment of quiet vigilance, could carry profound meaning when placed against the backdrop of time and memory. As the exhibition drew to a close, descendants of Samuel and Margaret shared their own reflections. They recounted stories passed down through generations, of a boy who had understood the world in ways adults could not, of a family that had faced the unknown with courage, and of a photograph that had silently chronicled the invisible threads that shaped their lives. Many visitors were moved to tears, struck by the intimate humanity captured in black and white tones, by the quiet bravery embedded in a fleeting moment on a summer porch over a century ago. The historian, standing before the photograph one last time, understood that the figure in the background, once a source of fear, had become part of the narrative of resilience. Its presence did not diminish the joy of the boy's wave. Rather, it gave that gesture depth and weight, transforming it from a simple childhood action into a testament to the human spirit. The photograph, restored and studied, had achieved something remarkable. It had given voice to a story that had been silent for generations, a story of observation and endurance, of ordinary lives touched by extraordinary forces. In the years that followed, the photograph continued to inspire interest and reflection. Historians, townspeople, and visitors returned repeatedly, drawn by the haunting yet compelling image of a boy, a wave, and the shadow that watched over him. It became a touchstone for understanding not only the family it depicted, but the larger history of American life in 1909, the ways in which ordinary people endured the unknown, faced uncertainty, and preserved their dignity and hope. The photograph had transcended its original purpose, evolving from a simple image into a lasting chronicle of courage, resilience, and the subtle interplay between light and shadow, innocence and awareness. And so, a boy waving on a summer porch in 1909 became far more than a moment frozen in time. He became a symbol of the delicate balance between fear and courage, of the ways in which ordinary lives intersect with the extraordinary, and of the enduring power of human spirit to confront the unknowable. The photograph, restored and revered, ensured that this story would not be forgotten, a story of shadows and light, of presence and perseverance, captured in a single frame, echoing through history for anyone willing to look closely and truly see.